Welcome, everyone, to the Q&A session for our upcoming course, Wise, Selfish, and Real, the 7-week spiritual path for complex and creatively wild women. I'm Lisa Bunnies, and I'm really looking forward to hosting this Q&A conversation for the Shift Network, where we'll explore the teachings of Sarah Marshank and address questions about her upcoming 7-week live video course, Wise, Selfish, and Real, which begins Wednesday, August 29th. Later, I'll explain how you can participate in the course, even if you can't attend the live sessions. But first, I want to introduce our guest. Sarah Marshank is the founder of Selfistry, which she teaches around the world, inspiring people to deeply know themselves by learning to be wisely selfish. Sarah holds a degree in alternative education and a master's degree in history and philosophy of education. She entered into a 10-year period of self-guided monastic life, emerging from retreat in 2004 with a clearer sense of self and fully aligned with Source and her calling. Sarah is the author of the memoir Being Selfish, which tells the story of her journey from a young woman to escort to monk and now a spiritual teacher. In just a few minutes, we're going to open up for your questions, but first, I want to welcome Sarah, who in a moment will lead us in a demonstration of her coaching method. But first, welcome, Sarah. I'm really looking forward to our time together.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be fun. I thought it might be just share a little story first to start.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I wanted to share with the listeners a brief story that recently happened in order to give you an idea of what we'll be playing with and working with over this course. So last week I was in Michigan with my mother who's dying, which is very bittersweet, and you can imagine all the complexities of that. And when I was there, I was very emotional and very much in the process of her dying and all of the stuff that would bring up in the mother-daughter relationship and in my role as just being myself in relationship with a dying person. And I bring this story up because I had an intention to go for 2 days just to be with her. And once I got there, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Like I just wanted to stay until her last breath, of course. And I sat with her, and she has advanced stages of dementia, so she was kind of in and out. And so I share with you this story because what happened for me was I really wanted to stay. Emotionally, I was distraught. And yet, when I got really quiet and listened to my intuition about what was the right action for me to take, what was the right thing to do, I was really clear that I wasn't supposed to stay. And so I share with you this story because it's such a perfect example, and it struck me so strongly as we're about to do this course that this question keeps coming up for so many of us, especially women, which is how do we tell the difference between our emotions and our beliefs or desires and our intuition? What is it about our intuition that we can learn to trust? And how do we know if it's our intuition or if it's just our emotions without making them just? Anyways, I wanted to share that story because we're going to work with a real person and explore this question of how do we discern, how do we discern from where inside can we trust our own knowing of what is the right action for us? Though my heart was broken and still is, and there's nothing wrong with that, I knew that the right action for me was to leave her side and come back to my life here in Berkeley. So anyways, Lisa, that's kind of an intro to what we might be exploring here today. And now I'm excited to explore that same question with a live person.
All right, great. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. In fact, that hits home for me as well. So we'll see who else's lives we can touch today. As you mentioned, we have a guest with us who's interested in your course, and she's offered to help demonstrate some of your work. So let's go ahead and bring on Phoenix, and you two can go ahead and get started. Welcome, Phoenix. I'll leave it to the two of you to take it away.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Phoenix. Welcome. So did that story resonate with you at all, what I just shared?
Very much so. I've lost both my parents, and so yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your mom, and I can definitely feel that.
Thank you. I love
Yeah.
that. And I also feel like, this course is actually wanting to address, making a decision about the next stage of our life or the next step we want to take. But in the real world, every choice and every decision has impact. And especially as women, we tend to have a lot of emotions and a lot of desires, which are really beautiful and really healthy. What we don't want to do is make them wrong or bad. And what we're wanting to discover is, how do we move from our intuition, which is connected to something much deeper inside of us? So if you're willing, I would love for you to share with us, is there an issue that you're struggling with that you have a strong emotional response about or belief about in your life?
Well, thank you. In fact, there is, and I've been musing over this for a little while. And actually, it's a perfect lead-in, because it's been since I lost my father, was my second parent to pass away, and I grew up in Chicago, and ever since but I've lived my whole adult life in California, and ever since he's passed, I've had this huge longing to go home, which feels like Chicago, and and I've been back there several times in the last few years. And every time I go, I feel a great sense of peace and groundedness. And I have friends there that I've known since I was 4 and 5 years old. And there are relationships in which I know that people have my back. And I can really just relax there. And it's also a much more affordable place to live than California. However, my job is here, and it's the best job I ever had. I really love this job. It sings to me, and I don't want to leave it. I plan to be here until I retire. And so it's really trying to trying to know how to respond to this deep longing without uprooting my entire life. And yeah, so it's been very active in my heart and in my monkey mind recently.
I can totally feel that. Wow. Well, thank you. That feels like a very real life dilemma that many of us are challenged with. So I'm going to invite you to just play with me a little bit here in the self-esteem model. And I'm going to invite you to imagine that the phoenix that wants to return to Chicago, who's longing for that, is one self inside of you. Okay? And then I want you to imagine that the phoenix that loves her job and would do anything to not leave it is another self. So we're going to kind of separate them as two little phoenixes, right? And more than likely, there's a few dozen other ones around those two that are building the case for either choice, right? So what we're going to do is, you spoke so beautifully to each of them. What I would love for you to do is to imagine that they are now above you. Imagine that they're just floating above you. Maybe they're in the room, maybe they're hovering on the ceiling, but they're outside of you in some way. And does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so just, energetically, just imagine that. Use your imagination. And then I'd love for you to feel, right? To feel the part of you right now. And if you can center that feeling around your chest, around your heart space, I want you to just lean back and look up at them and just observe them. Okay, go ahead and do that for a moment. And those of you who are watching, just imagine, if you're working with a similar dilemma, put yourselves up by the ceiling, right? And just lean back slightly and observe them from your heart. Okay?
Yeah.
And then take a nice deep breath. And really then bring your attention into your heart. So you're observing, as if your heart had eyes, you're observing the selves, one who wants to go and one who wants to stay. Very simple decision, black or white, go or stay. Okay, now what I would love for you to do is to take that attention in your heart and sink into your belly now. Okay, you still with me?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So go ahead and sink into your belly and imagine your belly is like the ground. It's roots, it's tentacles, it's vast, it's expansive, it's pure energy, it's the universe, it's source, by whatever name, it's the breath breathing you. Okay? Imagining that?
I am.
Okay, now. Good. I can see it. Okay, now imagine that you are the whole system or the whole self. And what I mean by that is imagine that you are that source, you are that observer, right? That witness, what we call in self-history, that loving heart space, and you are those selves running around. You're all of them. Okay? The invitation here, my love, is to center your attention in your heart space, in the witness, which is connected to source, to hear what is the right choice for you. Okay, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about what you discovered in that brief visualization and see what it activated inside of you. But what I really invite you to do is explore this terrain some more so that you can truly move from that center, which in self-history we do locate in the heart space, right? And it is this objective awareness. So why don't you just share with us a little bit about what you notice from the selves, from the witness, and then from the source?
Okay. So from the selves, I really saw and felt two very two whole beings who are trying to find the way to stay in my highest good and create the greatest fulfillment from all of my deepest desires. So I didn't have like the devil on one side and the angel on one side. That really both felt whole and just with even with each other's best interests at heart, if that makes sense.
Yes. Which makes it even harder. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When I brought it into my heart, I honestly felt I had some emotion come up because I feel like my logical brain is saying that this is my life here, and this is where I've established myself as an adult, and this is where my work is. And so I felt like it was like a childlike pain of, but I want to go home. It felt like that. And bringing it like really down and grounding it into the fullness of my being, or into the reality of my full experience as a human. I'm getting a message that the most important thing is for me to find that sense of home, what I'm calling home, within, and restructure my life as it is in certain ways, or open up to other possibilities that create that sense for me in my current my current situation.
Beautiful.
So I still, like, in this moment, I still feel activated with all of it, but that's like the most grounded message I'm getting from my full self.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love that. Thank you. We don't have a lot of time today, so we're giving just a little snippet, but what I want to do is I really want to invite you into the course, and I'll tell you why. What I'm noticing, right, is when you spoke to that heart space, like the little girl that just wants to go home, what we will do on this journey together is we're actually going to take that self and put her up on the ceiling too. Right? Because what arose when you went here to watch was another self. Right? So we want to presence her, but we want to take her out of that center that that's your home, right? That's the self. When Lisa was saying I spent 10 years in retreat, that is the self that I cultivated in those 10 years of retreat. And that is the self that I hear you as well yearning to cultivate, because that is home, and that is the one that's connected to source. So what we'll do during the 7 weeks is we'll practice ways alone in our own practice and with the group to learn how to pull out the selves without diminishing them or making them wrong. Some of them might need more attention than other ones, right? Some of them are really loud and obnoxious. Not all of them are so kind and so whole, right? And then we'll continue to practice coming back to the center that we can trust no matter what. No matter what. And it doesn't mean, obviously, whichever choice you make, one self is going to be sad. Sure. But when we make that choice from this centered place, we allow the sadness. The sadness becomes part of the beauty of our lives. So I'm excited for you to come home to that self and to trust the decision of whether to go to Chicago or stay in California. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I really do think that that your course will be very helpful in me to find that sort of like a deep knowing with equanimity about the other feelings that are existing.
Totally.
So
awesome.
I'm very intrigued. Yeah.
Good. I look forward to spending more time with you.
Me too, you.
Yay. Oh, sweet. Okay, Lisa.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, for your wisdom, and Phoenix for sharing your vulnerability. May your offering touch many hearts, and give your kitty some scritchies for me. And now we have the rest of our time together to dive into questions for Sarah as we prepare for her upcoming course. Again, that's called Wise, Selfish, and Real, and it begins Wednesday, August 29th. And if you want to check out the website while we're chatting and learn more about the 7-week course, you can visit wiseselfishandreal.com. That's 4 words with no spaces, wiseselfishandreal.com, to see the full description. So let's go ahead and get started with questions. If you have a question for Sarah, go ahead and type them in, and I'll be happy to read them aloud. We've already got some questions waiting for us, so let's go ahead with a question here from Leonie, who says, how do you navigate the pain that's caused for self and others when you make changes or end relationships in order to live out your truest self?
That's a really good question. Similar to what we watched Phoenix just go through, when we move from this centered self, when we take the time to be wisely selfish, and what does that mean? It means to give ourselves the time and attention to know ourselves deeply in the way that we just explored briefly with Phoenix. We trust this centered self and this centered movement in the world. And there's a reason why it's centered around the heart, because what happens is when our actions really come from this place, from this center, we move with kindness. And we move with generosity, and we move with sincerity. It's not like we have to try. It just is natural to the movement. And what happens as a result is, just like we presenced with Phoenix, it may be that some of her selves are not going to be happy. Just like when we move in the world and we move from that place, and we all have examples of this, it doesn't mean that the people in our lives are all going to be happy. They're not. But we want to empower ourselves to be able to hold their dislike, just like I was able to hold my grieving self that wanted to stay with my mother. It didn't mean that I stayed just because she was upset. It meant that I moved and allowed for her upsetness to also be present. So please don't be afraid of other people in your life not liking the choices that you're making, right? Even I would challenge you to consider the choices that you're making to protect them are still upsetting many of them anyways. So why not live from this centered authenticity and this connection to source and explore how that movement in life is actually really for the good of all? Does that make sense?
Thank you for that. I think so, yeah. And if not, Leonie, go ahead and type in saying that you need a little more clarification, but I believe that that answered it. Let's go to a question here from Brenda, who says, I've been away from my spiritual practice for several years now and find myself spiritually empty, tired, and lost. Where do I begin, and how do I begin again at a pace that doesn't feel like one more task?
That is a juicy question. Okay, so here's my answer. One of the things that I love about selfistry, and I feel is why it emerged in the structure that it did, is because it really integrates spirituality and psychology and our bodies. Like, it's a very holistic system. And so when we take the selfistry journey, what you'll discover is that what you'll choose to do to align yourself to source, which is more the spiritual element of selfistry, spiritual in quotes. There's a lot we need to unpack in these 7 weeks. But as you align yourself, as you discover ways of aligning with source, it won't feel like another task or another should, because it's integrated with the rest of you. So for example, going back to Phoenix, right? If we were to just separate out her desire to keep the job or desire to go back to Chicago and put her into therapy and just work with the psychological aspect of that, it would be isolated from a spiritual practice, which is really, in the selfistry system, more about aligning with source or truth or the breath breathing us, the universe as a whole. And I would guess that many of the listeners have their own ways of connecting with source and their own ways of managing your psychology. And what we want to do here is we want to weave them. We want to weave them into an integrated wholeness so that any moment we can be flexible enough to be with ourselves and see what they need, to step back and witness and pause and ground into our centered self, and then open up our capacity to listen to what the universe or source or the breath breathing us, where it's guiding us. We can surrender to that flow. So I am really not in favor of doing spiritual practice that feels like a task. So I'm going to invite us to choose practices that don't.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I'm willing to bet large amounts of money that you get this question more than any other, because I've got a lot of people asking it. Let's go with Vega's version of it. Vega says, selfish has a negative clang to it. Self-love sounds more like what you described, or did I get it wrong? Do a lot of people ask you about why you're using the word selfish specifically?
Yes, and it's a really great question. And you're right. Really what we're talking about here is more self-love, self-care, and self-knowledge that actually catalyzes and gives birth to an authentic, grounded self-awareness. And the reason I use the word selfish, first of all, in my memoir, Being Selfish, the title is Being Self-ish. And what we're doing here is we're redefining what it means to be selfish. Because actually, I love giving this example. In Chinese, there's actually two words for selfish, two symbols. One is the kind of selfish that is driven towards a desire. It'd be one of the selves up on the ceiling, right? There's this desire to acquire or to become something. And nowadays it's to become famous or to become wealthy or to become skinny or to become beautiful, or you fill in the blank, at the expense of our whole self and everybody around us. So that's the unwise kind of selfish. And then there's the wisely selfish that the Dalai Lama talks about. And this is the selfish that is focused on taking the time to know yourself, to really know yourself, which is what self-esteem is about. Self-esteem has created a system that is simple enough for you to integrate into your life without having to spend 10 years in retreat like I did. I did that for you. It gives you simple tools of how to integrate a groundedness that allows for your humanity and allows for your individuality and allows for your uniqueness in the context of your connection to source. So it's not separate from that. And when it's connected to that, we find our place in the collective humanity. We find our place in our tribe. We find our place in the world. And the way we move is in integrity and in harmony. And there's a certain peace and contentment that comes. And we feel like ourself, like our true self. So redefining being selfish, coming home to self-care that really supports self-knowledge in the way that we're talking about. So thank you for that question. It's also disruptive out there in the marketplace. So it captures your attention, and that has its value as well.
Right. All right. Well, if you're just joining us, we're here with Sarah Marshank learning about her upcoming course, which is called Wise, Selfish, and Real. And it begins on Wednesday, August 29th. And you can log on to wiseselfishandreal.com for all the details and to register. Let's go back to some questions here. We have one here from Megan who says, what is the most valuable thing you learned from your time as an escort?
Great question, Megan. I love that because when Phoenix shared her selves up on the ceiling, one of the things that I feel we're trying to do, and you might relate to this, is to really get authentic, right? Really get real with ourselves. And most of us, I know I did for many years, I was following the rules or the script or the suggestions of my peers, my family, my religion. There's all these shoulds and that's normal. We all have them. We're raised in a family that shoulds us. That's their job, and we're doing that to our kids as well. There's nothing wrong with it. But at some point, we get curious about, well, that doesn't feel like me, So our sexuality is a huge piece of that, where we're in this exploration and this inquiry, where we're taught one thing, and whether we're taught, let's say, to be monogamous or heterosexual, or we're taught to be polyamorous and bisexual or gender neutral or binary, whatever the messaging is, it doesn't matter, right? Neither of those is better or worse than the other. They're just different domestications, different shoulds. At some point, and maybe we'll talk about at some point theories of adult development or the neuroscience behind this, which will be woven into the course and is fascinating. At some point, we want to self-author our lives. We want to become that centered self we've been talking about. And one of the ways to do that is we have to try stuff on. We have to, because what happens is this centered self ends up expressing itself out there as a unique human personality who has a sexual drive and has a career choice and has all sorts of complexity and diversity going on. So my escort experience was really about self-exploration. And I'm going to encourage you to read the book to get all the details. But I'll give you a little taste in telling you that for me, it was a profoundly beautiful experience. It was about me exploring the place inside of me that could offer sex purely as a gift of pleasure and celebration, without needing to shame, without needing to feel like the men I served, which I served men, without them feeling like they had to do anything except receive. And so there's a lot more that we can talk about around that, and I'm happy to share more about it in the course so we can get into it. But the important thing, Megan, to know is that what we're going to be exploring in our authenticity, right, resting from this place, is we have to, to experiment, but not be reckless in our experimentation. Because how do you know if, for Phoenix, for example, she may need to go back to Chicago for a while to feel it, to really know what is true for her. So the same with our sexuality. Sometimes it gets messy, but it also can be really fun.
Right. Okay. And speaking of your book, that actually is one of the bonuses. It comes with the course, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Let's go to a question here from Sherry, who says, I've always been a caretaker, and I'm stuck in life because I can't break the pattern, and I'm very frustrated. Hopefully you can provide some insight.
Yeah, Sherry, I think you speak for a lot of us, especially us women. I think that's a huge should that we get, is that our job, in order to be of value, in order to be loved, in order to have meaning and purpose, is to take care of others. And I feel like a big part of the rising of the feminine in the world today is about taking another look at that. So I want to be really clear. We're not in this course going to be shooting ourselves into a new way of being. All we're going to be doing is genuinely and sincerely taking the time out to be wisely selfish and explore and tell the truth about what it is that we're doing and if it really resonates from here. Now, remember, we have a lot of selves, we have a lot of agendas and a lot of ideas about how we're supposed to be. And what we are going to be doing is we're going to be presencing them, and then we're going to be resting in the center to listen for really what is ours. So I would imagine that there's going to be some element of authentic giving, right? Authentic taking care or offering. It's part of our human nature, not just as women. But the question that we want to ask ourselves is the way that I am doing that now authentic to me? So, for example, when I was in retreat all those years, there was a way in which I denied my identity as a daughter. And this is going back to my story with my mother, where we started today. And that denial was not being true to an authentic expression of how much I cared for my mother. So once I got centered here, I picked that back up and I came back in the world in order to offer that love and that care from an authentic place. And it didn't look like how necessarily my mother wanted it to look like, but it was real and it was heart-centered, and it touched her and our relationship in a way that catalyzed a whole new level of authenticity, of sharing, and of intimacy that never would have been there before had I not taken the time to really center in what was my expression of care, taking care.
Okay.
It's a journey.
Thank you for that.
It's definitely a journey. Yeah.
It is indeed. Let's go to a question here from Kathleen. I believe she's referencing the conversation you had with Stephen Dinan. She says, you mentioned that you think women could support each other more. What do you suggest?
Well, it's interesting because I was writing some notes about what I wanted to share today and really underscore about what I'm excited about for this course. And that is that in the course, even though this is very internally focused and we're very alone in this process of self-discovery and self-inquiry, because we're going to invite each other to go deeply inside and be radically honest with all the selves inside of us, like we watched Phoenix do. But what we're also doing is we're going to be in community doing it. So there's this notion of being alone together that is incredibly powerful. And so just as we were sourcing that witness inside of ourselves, right, we will be doing that for each other as well. So there's a way in which working together as women, coming together as women, and removing, right, removing the shoulds of how we have been taught to be in relationship with one another, like compete with one another, like take each other out, like, gossip behind each other's backs. This is deep training that we've gotten, deep shoulding from our culture. And as we go internally to peel away into our authenticity, what we find there is a real love and compassion for humanity, and thus for the sisterhood. So I think that's a little bit of a convoluted way of saying that what we discover as we take this journey alone together is that the togetherness deepens as we become more authentic and centered. It doesn't happen that we then become more isolated. I thought that's what was going to happen. And when I was in retreat, I didn't think I was going to come back into the world. I was content to just die into source until that heart center broke open and pulled me back into the world. And so now self-mastery is an integrative tool and model that will allow us to be alone together in really powerful and impactful and magical and fun ways.
Okay, thank you. And as I mentioned before we started doing the call, sometimes questions come up, and this actually, your response leads to a question. This is from Morrigan, who says, I feel that women need to stop judging and comparing our looks to one another. However, many who are considered to be more beautiful and sexier than us average Janes act like they're better than us. What are your views about women who encourage the male gaze by stripping and posing for sexually oriented magazines, especially now that the Me Too movement is upon us?
Wow. Okay, that is a loaded question. So I feel like this is how I want to answer it because it feels like it deserves a conversation. Here's the way I'd like to answer it. It's really important that we take things in context. It's really important that we begin to not make a decision about what something should or shouldn't look like based upon a broad stroke, so to speak. So example, a broad stroke is women should never be exposing themselves naked in front of men during this era of the Me Too movement. I would never make a blanket statement like that. I feel like we as humans are way too complex and way too multifaceted and diverse, and we want to honor that. But what we want to do is just stop and take a look. So stopping and take a look at each individual moment or encounter or relationship or experience and source it, right? Source that action and that judgment from here rather than from here, right? From our heart center, from our non-judgmental, loving awareness space, which takes time to cultivate and return to because we're habituated and trained to live in our identities. You could call it your ego. You could call it your domestication. You could call it your, there's so many words for it, right? So what we want to do is, and so I believe your name was Oregon, or you're from Oregon. What we want to do, in my view, is to take everything in its proper context. My journey as an escort was beautiful, was empowering, was healing for the masculine and the feminine. But that does not mean that every escort experience is that. Similar with any action. It's like the question about caregiving. Some caregiving is the most selfish, in a not wise way, action that you could ever imagine. It's all about getting acknowledgement or getting something in return from that person. It's self-serving and self-absorbed. We cannot make broad stroke decisions or judgments without moving from this center. Because when we do harm to ourselves and others.
Wow, very nice. Thank you. I think that was an excellent response. I hope that was helpful, Morgan. Well, looking at the clock here, we have time for a few more questions. But before we take those, I want to give a few details about the course. Again, it's called Wise, Selfish, and Real. And this is going to be a fascinating 7-week journey under Sarah's expert guidance, where you'll break out of outdated spiritual practices and discover a more nourishing feminine practice for loving and listening to every aspect of your being, so you can create the next phase of your life from your deepest authenticity, fullest passion, and clearest truth. And the 7-week course takes place on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, starting Wednesday, August 29th, as I've mentioned. And if for any reason you can't join us live, that's fine. You will not miss the teachings. You will receive audio and video recordings, transcripts, and all course handouts on your course homepage. Also, I'd like to remind you that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving a full 2 weeks until September 12th in this case, to make sure that you absolutely love it. And as an added option, all participants are welcome to connect in a private Facebook community group so you can stay connected with one another and with Sarah between courses. Also, everyone who registers receives the Wise, Selfish, and Real bonus collection. First, you receive a video dialogue with Sarah and Diane Musho-Hamilton entitled All Artists Empty and All Artists Struggle, a conversation about the deep humanity of every sincere spiritual seeker. Then you'll get a video dialogue with Sarah and Heather Ashamara called The Rising Tide of the Feminine, Discovering the Collective and Personal Calling. Next, you'll receive, as I mentioned, the ebook version of Sarah's book, Being Selfish, My Journey from Escort to Monk to Grandmother. And when you register by midnight Pacific on Thursday, August 16th, you'll receive an additional bonus gift, and that is an audio dialogue with Miranda McPherson and Russ Hudson entitled Walking the Mystical Path with Depth and Substance. So before we get back into questions, Sarah, let me ask, what are you most looking forward to sharing in your upcoming course?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because as you were sharing about the course, I was just feeling into my heart center about if there's anything I want to share with the audience about the course. And what comes up for me is this, I recently taught a retreat in Poland. And one of the things that many of the women shared after that retreat was this notion of really feeling like they could trust themselves. Right. And so for me, that's really the heart of this work, is to really be wise in the sense of, and real, right? So the selfish part is to take the time to really come home to ourselves and to know ourselves at our core. And when we do, and that's where my 10 years of retreat, that expertise really feeds into the program, where I can guide through techniques and practices that really, really bring that resting to life in you. And from there, it's like you're good to go. You're sovereign. You can trust yourself. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't mess up at times. It doesn't mean that I don't mess up at times, that there are times when I'm not quite clear where's my intuition and where's my emotion, but I know how to get back. And I know the sound of my own intuition and that connection to source. I know that feeling in my body. It's also a very embodied journey. This is really a very feminine as opposed to masculine, which Stephen and I talked about in our first video event. And so there's something really beautiful and juicy and creative about it. And there's a relaxation that comes, like, oh my gosh, I don't have to strive to be something out there or towards some kind of, false notion of what it means to be happy or successful. There's this coming home to trusting myself and being myself and loving the human journey from that place. And it's so rewarding and so fulfilling to hear women say that they finally feel like they can trust themselves. And so that is my gift, and that is what I'm excited to share in this 7-week course.
Beautiful. Thank you. In fact, that leads perfectly into a question here from Marianne, who's asking, she says, I'm interested in what is holding me back from trusting myself. So maybe you can address that. What specifically in the course will help people to learn to trust themselves?
Great question, Marianne. I want to encourage you to just read through the modules so you'll get a sense of the arc of the journey, because it is a journey. So what we'll be doing is, just like I did with Phoenix, right? We will be working with each of these realms in a different module. Okay, so in the first module, we'll just get an understanding of the 3 realms, which is really important because I'm going to source your intelligence, because I know you're really smart. I know you have that intelligence that can understand and grok this whole notion of what's possible and what it means to be really authentically yourself, right? So then we start presencing all these selves in one of the modules. So there's a self inside of you that you're not trusting, or that doesn't trust you, or that was told by your mother or your father or your sibling that you're not trustworthy, or whatever all the stories are and all the life experiences and dramas and traumas that have defined who we are. We're going to make room for them. And then we're going to just let them be there doing their thing. Okay, we'll get back to them. We don't have to fix them or change them. Then we start to source, let me change that word. Then we start to dive into and practice and connect with this center, what we call the witness in self-esteem. It's an objective observer. It's a loving awareness. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have any attachments. It's just really curious and excited about being human, period. Okay, so we spend a lot of time, and that's the anchor for the trustworthiness that you're searching for. And then in the next module, we'll play with source. We'll really work through our resistance and our expectations and our assumptions about what is that breath breathing you? What is God? What is universe? Without it being a belief or a story or a fantasy, a real live embodied experience and knowing of that. And then from there on, the journey goes to integration, right? So then we start to move through these 3 realms in a way that brings wholeness, where we're living from that center, connected to source, and fully expressed out in the world. And it's that anchor in the witness. Like I say, the witness is the secret sauce. It really is the pivot where, when we're not feeling centered, we come home here and we resource ourselves, literally. And then we move out into the world as our human self with all of our quirks and our imperfections. There's not perfection here. It's a big art project, and it gets messy at times. But there's that creative and wild and expressive self that is grounded in that internal trust and connection to source.
Great, thank you. And I love that you grok, by the way.
It's a great word, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And for those of you who don't know, look it up on Google. It's Grok.
Right.
Okay, let's go back to the questions here. This is a question from Patricia, who says, what wisdom do you have for empaths in your work?
Empaths are a self. Right. So let me say it this way. Your capacity to be empathic is one of yourselves. Okay. And what we're seeking in selfistry, this integrated wholeness, is as we ground into source, right? Anchor ourselves in this witness or awareness, right? And then express ourselves out in the world. There will be times, my love, when your empathic superpower does not serve. When your empathic superpower needs to be shut off or set aside for another self to be the vehicle through which source expresses itself in that moment. And what we're the artistry, selfistry is a word that it combines the artistry of the self. Okay. So when we're looking for artistry or even mastery of the self, there's this quality of being able to pick and choose the colors that we're going to paint with on any given day. But the important and the essential piece is that it is this self that is picking up the paintbrush and choosing the colors. So the empath is one superpower of yours, one color that maybe gets used quite often in the artistry of you in the world. But to have it be your primary way of walking in the world, I would imagine would be very debilitating. Any primary self up here moving through the world is debilitating. It does not honor the diversity of you, and it also is not anchored and grounded in this trustworthy, authentic self that has the capacity to paint in many colors. And many of us are scared of that. We live in a primary self, which is understandable, or maybe a few primary selves. What we're seeking to do is to expand our repertoire of creativity of self and really ground into that inner artist, right? That inner creatress. Sometimes I call it like, this is an orchestra and we become the conductor. But we really have to embody that. We have to ground into that inside of ourselves. It can't, if it's an idea, then it's just another self up here and then it doesn't work. So I love your empathic self and she's welcome here too.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Let's go to a question here from Donna who says, how to celebrate your complexity rather than be overwhelmed by it?
I think I just answered that question, right? And we'll explore in the journey, we'll explore more specifically what that will look like for you. My experience is that slowing down, give yourself the 7 weeks of just taking the time to re-meet yourself, your whole self, all of yourselves. So that diversity of all of your superpowers and all of your interests and your secret passions or your secret desires, they're all in that orchestra of you and the diversity of you. And they want expression too. And they deserve it. Otherwise, they're going to wreak havoc inside of you, right? So what we want to do is allow for them, take time to meet them, because there's some that have been hiding. If you read my book, you'll meet some of the Sarahs that were hiding in the attic, in the closet, and so we want to allow them all out, and then we want to anchor in the artist, the true artist of you. And from there, my love, you will learn how to be creatively yourself in the world, honoring the diversity inside of you. And here's the magic piece about that is as we do that inside of ourselves, we're able to hold space for that in the world as well. And what we see in the world and the challenges of diversity is the same challenge that's going on inside of us. So we want to honor that diversity. I'm all for it. And we want to give it full expression, but we want to move from our center that is deeply connected to source. And we don't want an intermediary connecting us to source. It has to be embodied in ours. I feel that this is the evolutionary cusp we are on as a human species, that as individuals, we must have our own connection to source and trust that as we move in the world so that we know what's ours to do. Whether Phoenix goes to Chicago or stays in California, she will know that that is hers to do and be able to bring all of herself into that, even if there's a sad one. that didn't get what she wanted.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, but let's take one last question here. This is from Jill, who says, how do you ignore the pressures from the new social networking world, which is always pushing the need for outside validation?
Oh, Jill, is that not like the question of the time? I don't know that I have a very clear answer for that. I want to say by any means possible. I know that it's a challenge. It's almost like we have to just shut off everything for a while. Let's talk about that in the course, because I think that's a really good piece of how we need to choreograph our lives, where we minimize all that input, because it's like an assault onto our nervous system and so much pressure to be other than that we are. It's like I took those 10 years and really pushed everything away, and it was a huge relief. So I say, let's explore ways that you can do that in your daily life that really support you to have time to yourself, so that you can grow that authenticity and you won't feel as assaulted by all those shoulds and all those expectations out there in social networks and social media. It's very, very overwhelming to our psyches and to our nervous systems. I agree.
It is indeed, especially since we're broadcasting this on Facebook. The irony is not lost on us.
We can't get away from it. Yeah.
Well, this has just been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank our viewers for being with us today and for all of your great questions. You're the people who make these conversations so interesting. Once again, Wise, Selfish, and Real starts Wednesday, August 29th. And again, you can visit wiseselfishandreal.com to learn more and to register. So, Sarah, before we cut you loose, do you have any final words for our viewers?
Well, first of all, I also want to thank you all for your fabulous questions. And if there's any lingering ones, I will be on Facebook here at the Shift Network, happy to answer any of your concerns or questions. I guess what I would leave us with is this invitation to redefine what it means to be selfish and to consider the possibility that being wisely selfish in the way that we're talking about, to spend time to meet yourself again and to explore and inquire what is authentic to you from this heart place, from this centered place, might just be the greatest gift you can give yourself and the world. Just might be. Yeah,
that's right. Well, thank you again, Sarah. It's been a real pleasure talking with you tonight.
Thank you, Lisa.
You bet. And once again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. On behalf of all of us at the Shift Network, I wish you well and look forward to having you on this course or perhaps another one in the future. Have a great night, everyone.